let's take a moment to all try and think about the same thing. There's perhaps some sort of unknown energy that can be harvested by thinking about the same thing. We can only observe the world through sort of foggy lenses. Our conception of the world is not the world. Nevertheless, we can share mental spaces, and we can get pretty close to thinking about the same thing. Taking a look at surface sown winter cover, kale, lots of different versions of kale. Lentils, wheat, there's some lettuce, turnips. We'll see what hangs around. Nice, visually pleasing patch. Of plants that are human food. Something will grow somewhere. A population of plants, genetically diverse, becoming more and more tuned in to my little ecosystem. Daikon over here, these are surface sown. Seed dropped on the surface of the soil. Some genetic diversity here. This is from a Grex. So I wanted to share something that I read this morning that I thought was really interesting, and is a sort of good new idea that I'm going to keep around in my sort of search for understanding my own way of thinking, at the very least. And this comes from Noam Chomsky's book, What Kind of Creatures Are We?, which I recommend. It's a cool book. You kind of have to read it a few times to really get it. But down the line, I think I may do a sort of companion, just kind of go through each chapter on and talk about it on the channel here. So that's something I want to do in kind of the long run. But to speak more sort of generally about what I read this morning, more specifically, there's a very interesting quote. It's right at the end of the book, the very last chapter, which is called The Mysteries of Nature, How Deeply Hidden, or something like that. But he brings up that just as a phoneme, which is sort of the component of a word that doesn't really mean anything, so the p sound in potato, the p, it doesn't really mean anything, although it does combine with other things to mean something. We have, right, meaningless units then becoming a word, right? The word is potato. but that potato itself might also be sort of a meaningless or arbitrary unit. Our thing that we can mutually agree is, right, a potato is sort of like our thing that we can mutually agree is a puh, as opposed to a tuh or a duh, right? These do sound different, and that's how you make words. But that even words themselves are, in a sense, the thing that they mark is arbitrary. At a certain point, it doesn't really matter. You can because you can sort of work your way around describing the universe by combining the elements. And so that if we think of puh combining with a bunch of other sounds to make potato. Now let's think of potato as a concept, as one sort of arbitrary unit, right? We have to sort of agree that a potato is a potato. This is sort of a unit that humans can rely on. And then from there you go into describing, things you can do with a potato or how a potato is. But that potato by itself is pretty useless. So in the same way that, right, the mere sounds of a word are kind of useless, we also need to be seeing that the meaning of a sentence, right, is the sort of seems to be the sum of its parts. And that we are sort of taking the whole, the everything, and assuming that we can break it down into sort of mentally usable chunks. Right? And so when we come up with theories, right, or think about what's going to happen in the future, we are piecing together our current understanding of how things work together, all the many things in the world and how they work together, and sort of running a simulation of how that's going to work. And there are some things that we can, run simulations of with quite a bit of accuracy. If you have 3 apples and you add 2 more, how many apples will you have, right? That's an example of a pretty accurate simulation that we can do. But what about a simulation like, if I plant these seeds at this time, I can imagine them flourishing, but will they actually flourish? So then the markers we have for things are actually maybe arbitrary themselves. That's something I'd like to explore a little further. Our ability to distinguish, for example, between one species and another is a good example. We have a general intuition. That intuition also involves thinking that, a whale is probably a fish, which it's not. But right, you see historically all sorts of people thinking that a whale was a fish. It's not a bad guess, it just happens to be wrong. Other examples of that is, the difference between kale and cabbage and Brussels sprouts and broccoli. Many people are surprised to find out that these are different plants. And, before the days of DNA, there were a lot of things that, did seem like different plants that are actually sort of taxonomically the same. And so, although we see a lot of randomness in nature, the idea of, species, or that certain things can cross with other things, but can't cross with other things, that there seems to be somewhat of a yes or no answer to if this is possible for one thing to cross with another. Although you see that at the edges there are these gray areas, which makes it seem as though it's possible, we need to, if we're thinking of this, how a physicist thinks of things, you see this sort of gray area at the edge, and you might see something different. You might see that as, well, here's two things sort of running up against each other and going seemingly one way or the other. But even within these sort of yes or no distinctions that we make between species, that there does seem to be a gray area there, and that's the yes or no that we're trying to imply may actually just be in our heads, and that the taxonomy that we're doing on plants may actually end up looking quite a bit fuzzier than we think it is, or perhaps that there is some serious strength in those fuzzy areas, in the way that hybrid vigor, we see that it happens, but I'm not sure I've ever really been given a satisfactory explanation as to how heterosis or hybrid vigor works. Although I do like Joseph Lofthouse's explanation, which is that hybrid vigor is just the de-inbreeding of, that's just that you're witnessing the de-inbreeding of plants, and that ideally all plants all plants can have a level of hybrid rigor, even with genetic diversity, that you're not exploiting. It's not necessarily the exploitation of the inbredness, but that you get, two inbred lines do give you a highly consistent and F1 with hybrid vigor. But yeah, is having two inbred parents a good thing for other aspects of the sort of intelligence of the species, the genetic intelligence? Assuming that there is an intelligence here, that plants and their DNA, cooperate in sort of a neural network, that there is some sort of computation going on here to determine what thrives in the environment. Although we can, again, we want to consider this basically fuzzy at this point. All we need to do is use it, and that's actually surprisingly easy and doesn't require much knowledge of genetics or the sciences. Not that there's anything wrong with those things, but I think, a little bit of duality is a good thing to hold in terms of what we can say certainly, and what things are sort of mysterious to us when we look at how things work when systems are acting on top of systems, complexity that's going to be too difficult to sort of control for is still something that's usable in a sense. just hanging out in the garden, thinking out loud. And hope you all are doing well. Feel free to ask any questions you might have, or things you want to talk about. Be it, gardening, plants, the universe and the soil. Down to hang with whatever ideas people might have. So feel free to go off. Thank you.